Hi, I'm Rigger, this is You Alright, and today we're going to be building character. Before that though, be sure to like the video if you like it, share if you think others would like it, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and subscribe if you want to see more. So, I asked in my last RWBY video if you'd be interested in me talking about a mirror universe. I dubbed Mirror Mirror Universe because that's fun. And the response I got was actually really positive, so I thought, why not? And then I got really sick for a few days. Don't worry, it's not the big scary virus, but I've been pretty sick this week, and just regular videos, like, it was really hard. And even as I type this script up, I don't feel great. But yes, to reiterate, it's going away, I'm fine, it's regular sick, not the scary one, it's all good. But anyway, because of that, doing big videos like RWBY runs and stuff was just too much. I didn't have it in me to get them made, so, you know. But I thought, well, let's try out this idea I had then, because I sort of have the time. Since I couldn't really do the intensive work, I decided to try making something different for this video. So before we get started, disclaimer, I can't draw. I've always loved and liked drawing. I really love character design. I'm really passionate about character design and costumes and all those things, but just because I love it doesn't mean I can produce it. Doesn't mean I'm any good at showing the ideas in my head visually, and it does not give me skill in making visuals. However, it would be really hard to make a video like this with no visuals, so I tried drawing my concept. It sucks. But I bought myself a cheap tablet a while ago because I've wanted one for years, and I've never done a full drawing on it. I've only tried it out once, so I thought I'll break it out and I'll try a drawing. So, no excuses, okay, I'm still making a video, but just please be kind, alright? I just want to talk about the concept, not the actual art quality. I'm aware it's terrible, because I really wanted to talk about character designing and making a character, not just visually, but like from scratch. Like, how do you make a character? What are my thought process making a character? But you need something to look at. So yes, a mirror RWBY. Where do we start? Well, first off, I wanted to think about what this world could really be. And I want to make it clear before we really dive into it, none of these ideas are set in stone. This is just me doing concept work. But I like doing it with you guys. Give me your input, give me your thoughts. We can build this thing together. So that's what I wanted these to be. We'll do some character designing and get your feedback, and we can develop this world together. You can all build this along with me. So to start off, I wanted to think about this. When are we really seeing these characters? Are they also in their equivalent of Volume 7 in their reality? Like, well, how long has it been? What have they done? And I couldn't really decide, but I think it's important that I am pretty sure we're at least seeing them after Volume 3. After the big turning point for them. Things in this reality play out different, things are backwards, but I like that if we use Volume 3 as like a center point, that even though, you know, Ozpin might be the bad guy here and all these type of things, they still had a similar event happen. You know, they were just under different circumstances, but they still had a Volume 3. And similar events happened, but the reasons they happened were different and their responses were different. So because of that, I came to the conclusion that I think in this world, Team RWBY would never have reassembled. I think RWBY would be her murderous and, you know, violent self and go off on her mission. Yang was broken and never came back along. She didn't recover out of it. And one of the reasons for that also is Blake is off on her own, and Weiss stayed in Atlas. But I think that's really because the girls went into being huntsmen with different intentions. They were slightly different people heading into this whole story too. Because we need to remember, Ozpin is the villain. So I backtracked here, and this is what I sort of came up with. So, Summer's mission, whatever the circumstances of that were, it still happens in this world. But Ty is a hardened fighter. He's not a bad dad, we're not just flipping everything for the sake of flipping it, we're trying to build a universe. So instead, he's similar to Ty, but his resolve and his way of dealing with things are different, and what his response is to what happens to Summer is very different. He wants to toughen his kids to make sure that they survive, because Summer didn't. So he doesn't lose them like he did for her. So he doesn't shy away from it. His breakdown wasn't him shutting down. It was him protecting his kids by training them to be beasts. But there were times where he was unnecessarily harsh, probably. Again, not a bad guy, but he takes the more military approach of breaking them down and building them back up. He builds them to be warriors. As a result, RWBY and Yang are harder and more serious. They still like having fun, they're still themselves, but they also have like a brothers in arms thing, as well as a family bond. You know, they grew up under grueling training regimens. RWBY is a better fighter, but has less compassion and forgiveness. It's not that she totally has none at this point, it's just really buried under all of her training. When the Roman thing happens that kicks off our whole story, I'm not totally sure what that situation is in this world. I'll think about that later if we do like Roman and Neo. But please, put your ideas down below if you have any. I'm thinking it might be he still robs a shop, but the circumstances are different. He's robbing it for dust and ammo still, but for the rebellion, for the good guys trying to fight Ozpin. But, you know, to RWBY, who is inducted into the good side, it looks like he's the bad guy still, so it can still sort of happen the same way, but the intentions are different. But in that encounter, RWBY is more ruthless and brutal, beating down Roman's crew, possibly killing some of them, and he still gets away. Glinda, who I'm working on, I'm not totally sure, I'm thinking perhaps she's more motherly and is slightly rocked by RWBY's attitude. I'm thinking she's on Ozpin's side, but she's also inducted in believing the lie. She doesn't realize they're the bad guys. But Ozpin sees opportunity in RWBY. See, obviously he does know who RWBY is, who her mother was, and her latent talent, so he takes a different approach. He puts the team through the trials, etc., and inducts them into the school, and things start developing, but perhaps in the equivalent of Volume 2, where she first confronts Cinder, the infiltrators, he takes a different approach. Ozpin reveals to RWBY that there are agents of evil around, and that he believes there is a good chance they are connected to, or at least associated with, the forces that contributed to killing her mother. And so on, Ozpin leads into this angle of weaponizing RWBY's want for revenge, a lot earlier in the story, building himself a crusader and a zealot. Combine that with her training, and then the Volume 3 equivalent happens, and RWBY is set on a warpath. I can't decide if in this mirror world we want Pyrrha or Jean to have lived. It could have been edgelord Jean that thought he could take Cinder and paid for it, leaving a broken Pyrrha behind. Let me know. But on that warpath with Nora, Ren, and the Jean or Pyrrha, whichever we decide, Weiss, Blake, and Yang don't return. So at some point we have this RWBY who knows about Salem, especially after her Tyrion equivalent confrontation, and assumes Salem either killed her mother or is responsible. She is the greatest evil that she knows about in the world, and her mum was amazing. So even if Salem didn't do it by hand, it's probably Salem's fault. Remember, Salem is the good guy in this world, but Ozpin has framed her as the bad guy to the world. So, one way or another, she will kill Salem or everyone under her. That's RWBY's mission. I'm not really sure about the Oscar situation. Send me your thoughts on how we deal with that. I feel like the events of like Volume 5 onwards, or maybe just after that, would have varied pretty differently from what we got in the actual story. Rather than plan them all now, we'll work on it later. But, you know, without a doubt, we're looking at least Volume 4 or 5 timelines so far. So, let's look at how we visually represent this RWBY. Again, be nice, please, but we'll discuss the ideas. So again, I'm not exactly sure what volume, quote-unquote, this RWBY is in. It could even be 7, or what exactly has transpired for every event, but we'll go through a lot of it. So, here's the starting concept. Get your bearings with it, and I'll take the background away, and I'll go over my thoughts. So, first off, perhaps disappointingly so, it's just RWBY, right? It reads very clearly as being RWBY, or very close to RWBY. But that's actually on purpose here. If we want people to look drastically different, we can, but for the purpose of this story, you really want it to be as close as possible to reading as RWBY, just with some changes. We need to immediately register that, more than anyone else, that's RWBY. She's still on track, she's still herself, just much grittier, and rather than being drastically different, she just has indicators that this is a different person. So aside from that, we'll work from bottom to top. First off, the boots. I'm not totally happy with them, obviously, and as you can see, I didn't put in much detail because I suck. But looking at her actual boots she's worn before, and what I was going for favored more like a jack boot or a combat boot, similar to her earlier designs. Not up over the knees like in Volume 7, it's a bit much, and I wanted this more serious approach, so it's also not skin tight, like it doesn't follow her calf or anything. It's more like a thick, solid military boot. It's heavy and it looks a little odd on her thin legs, but it has a very solid and thick design to it that feels like she will just stomp you. She's a very hardened person. Color-wise, it's very much like her first set of boots, but I went with the belted design. It also helps keep a consistent sort of red design from top to bottom, making those belts red. I did initially consider red laced boots, like her initial red laced corset thing, but then I remembered that red-laced military boots have a very unfortunate real-world connotation, and we don't want to go anywhere near that, so that's not happening. Stuck to the belts. So I went for 2 simple belts rather than tons of them, so that they stand out, but they're also for, like, you know, quickly dressing. But the one thing I did take from Volume 7 was the steel caps, because throughout this whole look, I wanted to lean into the fact that this RWBY is set to fight you. Openly wearing steel caps like this says she's very willing to kick your head in, or at least that's the sort of assumption of the presentation. Now, for the legs, I went for the distressed look, again, sort of like her Volume 4 look, but I didn't want the, like, thigh-high sort of cut-off. Instead, it's a full tights, just again, to try and minimize it, perhaps feeling less serious. There's no sort of hint at, like, it's trying to show skin or be a look. It feels weird talking about this with a character like this, but you know what I mean. It's not like a presentation thing, or it has less of like that direct presentation look. And it's a bit less anime with the thigh-high thing, you know. Also, it being more tattered matches the cape, and the tattered cape, gotta love it. It's a bit longer and wider than the other capes she's used. It's more of a full look. It makes her silhouette bigger and more imposing. It's very much more a full cape than the sort of hidden behind her, like, trail of a cape. Next up is the dress, which I'm not too happy with how it looks, really. But I can see why in Volume 7 they had black pieces hanging down from the corset bit, because it breaks up some of this red, but I also think some of it's just my lack of skill at drawing it. But I wanted to make it as non-flashy as I could, sort of a plainer look. None of these dangly bits that seem to be there just for the look. The skirt, I tried to play off her original, but invert the layers, so rather than being black outside and red underneath, it's red outside but black underneath. I couldn't have her do the full tutu thing. It's too, you know, little girlish for this series presentation, so it is much closer to the Volume 7 look. I wanted to indicate the skirt is actually split on this side for mobility, which is why I actually put in a second layer, because I would like to think maybe the second layer is also split but on the other side, allowing a lot of mobility for her legs without it being revealing with the split, because that's not the goal for this at all. Next up, we do the belt, and every single RWBY has her belt the same way, so I kept it with the same things on it. So, for colour, I tried to not just copy Volume 7, but honestly I worked with the other colours and they didn't work, so this way just works best. Again, it's very Volume 7, but it works for a reason. Making it black or red just didn't read right with everything and threw it all off. I can't draw bullets at all, apparently, but you know what that's supposed to be. Every RWBY has them, so they're there. Because of how her cape is set up top, I couldn't have the brooch or the emblem on there, so I kept it on the belt. But I like here that I put in that it's cracked. It's symbolic. This is a broken rose. It also adds to the battle-damaged overall design that you see in a few places here. You might notice that on her back there, Crescent Rose doesn't look right. I'll cover that later. Moving on to her arms, I was looking for inspiration and landed on 2 things: more combat focused and Kaiba. So I knew I wanted exposed shoulders rather than her mesh approach, but I didn't want too much skin, again because it's meant to be a combat focused RWBY, so despite wanting those exposed shoulders, I wanted her arms covered. So I thought about Neo's anti-gravity sleeves, and I don't really like them that much, but then I also remembered Seto Kaiba. So what I tried to do is indicate that this is one long sleeve, one long glove, all made out of like a material. It's soft-ish, see that's why it's sort of a bumpy line here. It's held in place with this Kaiba-like belt above the bicep, and it gives some spikes to her silhouette, without being over the top like his is. But then over the top of that, which is also something Kaiba did, she has extra protection on her forearms, some sort of braces or greaves that are more hardened leather, like they're a harder material. And I tried to indicate that with like a steel ring at either end, from below her elbow to just where her wrist is. And again, I tried doing the rings in red or making them belts, and it looked silly and it didn't really work. And there's actually a fair bit of like silver in this design, so carrying it over here sort of worked, and it indicates, or hopefully tries to indicate, that the forearm piece is separate from the rest of this long glove that runs underneath. And these steel rings sort of indicate a harder image, like, you know, it represents a harder material. Lastly, and I actually did a terrible job showing this because it was a later edition and I didn't make a pose for it, and drawing hands sucks, by the way, we all know this, but I actually wanted to do metal caps on her knuckles. So you can see these tiny indicators here. They look terrible in this image, but it's meant to be like a piece of flattened metal over each knuckle on her fist. The fingerless gloves, while being a bit cliche, actually really work for her sniping, but adding these small steel plates on her knuckles again says this RWBY, unlike the regular one, is loaded herself up to punch you and really hurt you. Again, I failed to show it very well, but I can say it here. And I would think that the glove in general is harder around the fist than the sleeve. Obviously, it's still like a material, but it's not, it's more like a hardened-y sort of biker leather material. Not like the hardened, greave-like stiff material on her forearm. Next up is the corsets. RWBY has always had one to a degree, so I did one here, and decided to match it with her greaves and trying to show it's more of a harder leather. It's more like an armor than the one she's worn before. So I decided to give it a bit of a unique layered belt look that upon experimentation worked really well to make those belts red, so it made like a red X. I wanted to indicate that these red belts were also like a leather, like a thicker material, so I gave them like this shine line and tried to put like steel caps on the ends of the belts and bigger buckles. The eyelets for the belts, while I didn't do the detail of putting the hole in them, sort of make like a riveted look along the belt too, which is nice. So I continued it with the very plain lace design on the black, but keeping the eyelets there also being a rivet like silver. And while it still has the corseted midsection, I like the big belts across the shoulders being like this is a much more solidly fitting design. It's a much more harder look, it's much more protective. And keeping the laces a plain, simple, uncomplicated black helped break up that red dress line through the middle. And I found they sort of added up to the red X at the top, with like small black X's through the midsection and a big red X across the chest. Up on the shoulders, I wanted the exposed skin very specifically for that scar. See, a scar to me, especially in the world of RWBY, means something more, means something special because of aura. On a huntsman, like with Tyrion with scars, it implies they've kept fighting without the aura, that they've been seriously wounded and still won. So I wanted that feel here, to make it feel like this RWBY is more dangerous, that she won't run away or stop because you break her aura, and she might just win. I tried continuing the dress here to start with, but it clashed so much with the belts that I got rid of it. So instead I assume that this red dress actually continues up and around the neck in the middle. It doesn't just end across her chest, but the belts and cape cover all that. So, up top, there's a fair bit here, so we'll start with the eye. It's very cliche to do the RWBY eye thing, but I thought instead of it happening to real RWBY, we instead use it here as a what could have happened. What could have been, and again, it shows what this RWBY has been through and fought through. But I actually realized with this concept we can take it a step further. See, what I did was I took away this eye, I put some long hair over her other remaining eye, and I covered her mouth, which pulls this whole RWBY's face back. It hides all of the key things to her expression, trying to make her feel withdrawn, hard to read, and hard to connect with. Rather than just doing the eye for an eye thing because it's just a line to remember, we can use it to get more out of this whole design. We can use it to build her personality around and show how far gone this RWBY is. Now, it has to be this eye. I've seen people do it with her right eye, but I want her to keep her sniping eye and not be hampered, so it's gotta be the left. But then I realized this works great because I gave her another scar here to add to the damage look, but also it's very much Weiss's scar. It links them. But since Team RWBY never reformed, it's probably really hurts this RWBY to be reminded of Weiss by her own face. It might even be why she tried sort of covering up the attention that might get by putting her logo on the eye patch. Also, I didn't draw that logo, I stole that from the wiki. Now, also think, eye patch and longer hair covering one side, I'm trying to purposely put this RWBY's look closer to our ideas of Cinder. Not blatantly, but along those lines. So it's a different eye patch and she's actually got her hair on the other side like normal RWBY, but it sort of gives a Cinder feel. Also, psychology-wise, growing her hair out to slightly shield her good eye makes sense, so as a mentality sort of thing after that kind of injury, even if it's subconscious, it actually makes a little bit of sense there. Also, I know I didn't draw her real eye very well, it's just blank, but even though it's my lack of skill, I kind of like that it feels more hollow, like there's less definition in her eye, it's sort of a bit blanker, her soul's a bit sort of withdrawn. Now we'll talk about the cape. I took inspiration from how she currently has it, but far bigger. Because it's red, there's actually a lot of Mikasa energy here, which was accidental, completely. It's just the colours were right. I was thinking more along the lines of some other anime people you see with covered half face and mouths to look make them harder to read and sort of look more dangerous. The one thing I couldn't reincorporate were her crosses at all, but she's pretty much done that in the show anyway, she's got rid of those. These days I actually sort of headcanon, or maybe it's supposed to be that they're an allusion to Crow because of his cross things. I'm not sure that, the cross as a symbol exists in the world of Remnant, but I'm not sure how Ruby's relationship with Crow would be in this universe anyway. Perhaps he still did train her to use the size, but they grew apart because he got worried about the path she was heading down or something. I'd have to go into it if we do a Crow video. If I do a Crow one, leave your ideas below. What would Crow be like in Mirror Universe? Also, the longer hair. I considered short and very short for like military style, more like a Harriet, but then it doesn't really read immediately as RWBY, and that's sort of what we want. At this length, she can still hide her face a bit, but it follows the general shape of her regular hair, and while still being closer to an original Cinder a little bit too. I think I might even cover her face a bit more if I was a better artist and better at this. As far as the red tips though, it's not just that I'm mad at it, but it's perhaps that this RWBY would go harder on that, to really emphasize the look, to make those reds redder, building an image for herself, and again, providing more distractions for the eye than, being able to focus on her face. Also, at this length, she could still bundle most of her hair back into a hood that I do think is still there, just under her hair at the back. Maybe just have the front strands hanging out if she had the hood up. I didn't provide a back view, but I'm thinking it doesn't go far past her shoulders at all. Lastly, I'll cover Crescent Rose. Yes, the one here is wrong. I mentioned it on Twitter actually, but check it out. I realized that this being Crescent Rose, actually looks really cool if you invert it. Look at that. Also, I did not draw these Crescent Roses, I found them online. I don't have a reference for where I found them, unfortunately it was just Google Images, so sorry whoever made these, thank you. But yes, I just wanted to Photoshop and, reverse the colours. Not perfectly, but it does look pretty cool, I think. It has this dark version of itself sort of look. And that is what I think this RWBY would have. So since it's a mirror world with a darker RWBY, she can just have this as Crescent Rose. It's still the same, she just painted it the opposite way when she made it. It's just inverted. It's cliche and easy to just say everything is, the reverse, but it actually really works here. And again, it's another cliche thing, but I couldn't help but think of this as the Black Rose version. And I think that about does it. Obviously it's Mirror RWBY, but my brain has also dubbed this Desperado RWBY with that face covering and the wandering badass kind of energy. Again, my art sucks, but look, it took an embarrassingly long time to draw this, so I'm gonna use it. But I hope I have at least shown that I put a lot of thought into the actual design despite my inability to show it properly. It's always, I think, interesting to try and tell a story with what people are wearing and how people look. You can read into their lives by how they are presented, especially with, characters like this. She looks more hardened, she looks more battle ready, she carries more scars. You have that no mercy sort of feeling because she's clearly fought past her limits and past her aura breaking many times here. She's carried injuries, but she's still, on the warpath. She has a wider and spikier sort of silhouette, a more imposing sort of look to her in general. And yet, it still immediately reads as RWBY. We look at that and know that it's RWBY. And we do things that we don't usually do with main characters, like hide away all of their features and make them hard to read and make their expressions hard to get across. It's actually funny, I was thinking this RWBY might have a very hard time using her silver eyes. I'm not sure if she ever meets Maria or not, or if Oz told her what he knows or not, like earlier in the story, I don't know, or how to use them, or if he even knows exactly how to use them, but this RWBY would have a very hard time, I think, emotionally centering on protecting others rather than just destroying enemies, because her mindset has been to destroy the enemy. Combine that with only one eye as well, so it's likely a tool she can not rely on very much at all, or maybe barely use. She probably has used it, like in an incident, but subsequently she's had to fight a lot harder to win her fights, leading to this look she has now. I'm not sure of exactly the details on that, it's just an idea that floated past my mind. To plot out any more, we'd need to work on other characters and the world more, but this is a good start. So, I hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, my name is Rigo. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope I did alright.